happens in real time. How do we help students learn within that?
What stories do they have to share? And are there...
I need to understand, they can't get food.
Fourthly, they need to foster a healthy disregard for the impossible.
Have y'all ever realized simple people
So I just came from a conference where we're sharing ideas about fixing the world, and as you can see from my name tag, oh, well, it looks like I took my name tag off, sorry, but I'm here to share ideas with you all. And so the main idea that I want to share today is that education, reforming that, is such a great general idea. So where can we start? Well, I think that what I want to share with you today is my perspective, a perspective of a high school student, which unfortunately hasn't been heard as often as it should be when it comes to education reform. I mean, a lot of times I see a lot of politicians who are speaking on education reform, and they'll cite statistics such as standardized testing scores and graduation rates, and I think to myself, well, how can these adults possibly fix education when it's been 20, 30 years since they've been in high school? How would they possibly know what students go through every day on a daily experience? Well, I go through that daily experience every day, and so I wanted to share with you my observations that I found in my own school and my own education, and just what I think can be done to fix that, to ensure that everyone in America has a better education and a better chance for a more successful future. Now, my perspective on education was really given to me by my parents. See, my parents were born, raised, and educated in South Korea, and the way Asians do education is very fascinating, but that's entirely different TED Talk that I can't get into right now. But I wanted to just share with you a small story from my own experience with my parents. I think when I was 6 years old, I asked my mom, I said, "Mom, were you a really bad child when you were younger? What were you ever punished for? Do you remember?" And she said, "Well, I only remember one very specific moment where I was punished severely. I was spanked by my teacher at school for a bad grade, and then I came home and my parents also spanked me." And I said, well, Mom, what was the grade? Was it like an F? And she said, "Well, it was a 100-point test, and out of 100 points, I only scored a 94. And you can imagine the impression that I had as a young child. So from a very young age, I understood the seriousness of education and just how critical that is to my success in future. So when I looked upon education, I was so much more inspired by my parents to really truly get everything I possibly could out of my education. So when I was observing that, I found a few conclusions that I think are really important for all of America to hear and really try to make some action on that. The number one thing that I found was that technology, in this global community where we're so dependent on technology isn't being used efficiently as it could be. I attend Ravenwood High School, which is in Williamson County, and I'm a junior this year. Go Raptors. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was that in my school, we have a public drive that we all save on, and a lot of times my teachers will attempt to do a class assignment where we all save on the same document. But that's very difficult because our public drive is so limited, and sometimes it has a lot of faults that saving on this same document isn't possible anymore, and that class assignment's purpose kind of fails. And now I found out about this Google document idea of the whole on-the-cloud technology where students can access this document on not only at school, and they can all save on the same document, but they can also access that from home, something that our public drive didn't offer us. And so that was one thing that I wanted to fix, and so I really wanted to emphasize the importance of using on-the-cloud technology so that students can not only learn knowledge in school, but also take that outside of school and also be able to learn at home. And this year, my school implemented YouTube, which I thought was a really great idea, and it made my education much more innovative. I remember sitting in AP Human Geography, and my teacher shared with us a video of a National Geographic information on how China had reached a large population this year, and how the whole entire globe had reached 7 billion people for the first time. And that was, it was a very interactive video, and I felt that my education was just so much bettered, because it wasn't that I was just reading a simple article and learning in a very objective way, but that I was actually involved in watching this, and that it was staying in my head, the knowledge. And so I think that YouTube is something that could definitely be used in education more often, because it's an accessible tool for teachers to find videos that relate to classroom material. And also, we can use Facebook and Twitter and other sorts of social networking sites to take the classroom material outside and take it to home, and so that we can continue class discussion on any material that we have. And finally, I also wanted to move on to how education is squandering critical thinking lately. I think that a lot of schools are finding that critical thinking is really important, but that they're going about in the wrong way. They're trying to teach critical thinking. But the National Council on Excellence of Critical Thinking says that critical thinking is defined as the thinker taking charge of his or her own thinking and imposing intellectual standards upon themselves. That's really important to note, that they said take charge. That implies that critical thinking is individual, that it's unique to every person. Each person makes that happen for themselves. And so it's not something that can be graded on a universal scale. And that's intentionally what schools are accidentally doing, I think out of good intention, but ending up doing it the wrong way. Standardized testing is something that's really a big part of our education system right now, but that's really squandering the critical thinking of students like myself, like me. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that critical thinking is something, since it's such a unique perspective and that each individual makes it on their own, that how can we say that you can get a score of 1 to 9 on the AP exam depending on how you critically think? See, it's not about what College Board wants me to think, it's about how I take things in and make a perspective out of that and make an opinion based on that. And so I propose that in our education system, we need to take standardized testing out and implement a new form of testing for thinking. And such a way that we can do this is something that the IB program, the International Baccalaureate program, has been working on, is testing students in a more innovative way, rather than just rote memorization and standardized testing, such as multiple choice. Instead, the IB program does testing where the student writes an independently done research essay, and then they present an information session before a board of judges. And so they're graded on an individualized scale compared to how well the student presents that information. Now, we can build upon this form of testing and use that as a foundation. One way we can do that is we can have an end-of-the-year interview with a professor or an expert of that specific subject, and have a very personal one-on-one interaction between the student and the teacher. And the teacher can ask very comprehensive questions that ensure that the student hasn't just simply memorized the information, but has actually processed that and truly implemented that into their life. And this is a testing form that actually comes from the great universities of the Renaissance period in Europe. And you may be thinking, well, why are we taking a step back in history when we're trying to go forward? Well, I don't view that as going back in history. I actually view that as us going back to our traditional roots. Because, I mean, our great universities today are descendants of those vessels of educational tradition. And so I think we need to go back to that path that we mistakenly diverted from. That path of education, where education is something that we learn knowledge from and we implement that into our lives in a meaningful way. It's not just simply getting a good score. So we need to reduce America's dependence on standardized testing overall. And finally, I've been speaking to adults about changing education by asking you to go forth and talk to education boards, talk to Congress members, try to get technology implemented into my education and other students' education more often, but also taking standardized testing out and putting a more creative, innovative testing form. But finally, I also wanted to speak to my fellow generation members who are in this audience today. And it's important that we realize that we have to have a passion for learning as well. Because changing education, we may feel that we can't do anything about it because we're just kids. But that's not the case. See, education will only change when it starts with the desire of the students to change that education system. I've noticed that lately we've become very lazy, I think, very discouraged by how limited our education system really is. But what we need to do is we need to be passionate about what we're learning and definitely implement that into every aspect of our life. We're not just completing homework, we're learning true knowledge that will really help us in the future, in our future jobs, to make America and the world a better place. So, my fellow generation members, I challenge you to be more passionate about your education, because when passion for changing our education starts with us, then it starts to permeate throughout the entire community, and it reaches adults, and it reaches school boards, and finally it reaches Congress, and we're going to see big changes then. Finally, and as a wrap-up, I wanted to honor Steve Jobs, the former CEO of Apple, who I think of as the innovator, because he was always looking for problems in his devices and trying to fix that and trying to redesign that. And there's something that he said that will always stick with me. Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. And I know that every single person in here is here because we're all leaders. We're wanting to change the world. So I ask you, are you going to be a follower who allows this education system to continue to limit critical thinking of students, to not allow students to have that innovative learning experience? Or are you going to be a leader who steps up, finds the problems in our education system, and wants to make an impact on that and change that? Leaders, I say that we need to, in this age where we don't want to leave any child behind, we need to leave this education system behind and move forward to a better future for America's youth. Thank you.